What is going on, guys? I'm pretty sure it's Friday, and that means it's time for an episode of My News Radar. And let's get things started by looking into the distant future at rumors about the Galaxy S23 Ultra. And I know what you're thinking, Shane, that's still a long ways off. Why are we talking about a phone that is so far off? What could we possibly know about it? And the answer is maybe nothing, but there is at least one pretty big rumor that's kind of emerged and gone away and re-emerged and gone away and re-emerged again. And I think it's actually worth looking at just to kind of talk about what it might mean should it be true. Ice Universe on Twitter tweeted, as one does on Twitter, this particular post, talking about the next Moto flagship and the fact that it is going to have a 200 megapixel sensor. And the sensor that they're using is Samsung's sensor, the HP1. Now, Samsung has made the HP1. I believe there is a 2, and now there is a 3. So Motorola is going with the oldest one, the HP1. Maybe cost concerns, maybe availability, probably many reasons why they're going with the oldest one and not the newest one, but I digress. They are using the HP1, which is a 200 megapixel sensor, and it bends down to 50 megapixels, which is very impressive, right? To be bending and still be that high resolution. Now, of course, a Twitter picture, you can't really tell much. They're compressed into oblivion. Is this a phenomenal picture, a bad picture, a good picture? It looks like it's well lit anyways. Can't really tell much from this. So we're not going to stick with that. What we're going to look at is the rest of the sentence here. The Galaxy S23 Ultra will also use a 200 megapixel sensor, but the relevant sensor has not been announced. Now, that's really interesting to me because Samsung has announced the HP3. In fact, they did so June 22nd. This was very, very recent. In this video, they talk about their 200 megapixel ISOCELL HP3. They go over all the sort of specifications about it, the pixel size and so forth, which you can see here is 0.56 micrometers, which is not particularly large, but again, it's such a large resolution, the pixels kind of get smaller, and then you bend them, so you multiply that times 4, and that's going to be your effective pixel size, which brings it in line. You know, we've talked about something like the Xiaomi 12S Ultra, which has that gigantic 1-inch non-cropped sensor, and the individual pixels there are quite large. Well, you know, you bend this one, you multiply times 4, and it brings it somewhat close to being in line with that. So you do likely wind up having pretty good clarity, pretty decent low light, although I think there are still some pretty big advantages of using a physically larger sensor, right? The one that's in the Xiaomi still going to be physically larger than the one that we're talking about here. But, you know, look, this is basically two different approaches to solving the same problem, to improving your photographic prowess, to taking better and better pictures. High resolution, bend down, or physically large sensor, kind of taking things to a more direct route, like a more traditional route, like what we saw in normal cameras maybe. Part of me does think it is crazy that we're still continuing to just pump the megapixel count higher and higher and higher, as if that's automatically going to make your picture a better picture. That's just basically making it larger and larger, which, I mean, yeah, sometimes that does lead to better detail, but we make it such a high resolution, and then we bend the pixels down and make it actually only output at 50 megapixels, which is still enormous. Like if you took a 50 megapixel print and printed it out at like its native size, it would be absolutely massive. Of course, Samsung's doing more than just increasing the resolution, and they know how photography works. It's not like they're saying it's 200, that's a bigger number than 50, therefore it's better. They know that it's not that simple. There's a lot more going on than just that, but it is quite strange to watch this number get to a height I don't think any of us really expected to ever potentially see in a phone, but here we are. Not only is it coming in a Motorola phone, maybe it's coming in a Samsung phone as well. But of course, if we are to believe the tweet from Ice Universe, this can't be the sensor because it's not been announced yet. So the simplest option, and this is something Samsung has done in the past, they will make a sensor like the HP1, 2, or 3, whatever it might be. They've got many different sensors that they have produced, and then they will slightly modify them for their biggest flagship devices. So it's like, here, you can have this sensor for your phone, but we're going to keep the best version of it for ourselves. So likely, if this is to be true, and we're going from a 108 to a 200 megapixel camera on the S23 Ultra, it is probably going to be a modified version of the HP3, which of course that is the sensor that we were just watching the sort of announcement trailer to, staggered HDR and all this good stuff. I'm sure that it's going to be a good camera sensor. Now, if you remember when we went to the 108, there were some growing pains, right? They had some issues with autofocus and things of that nature. So hopefully they've got the software worked out this time around, and it's not going to have these sort of weird issues that we had last time we jumped up to an insane 108 megapixel going from 108 to the 200. Now, of course, the S23 Ultra is still a long ways out, but the Z Fold 4 and the Z Flip 4 are actually quite close. They are going to be fully announcing them August the 10th. If you'd like to reserve a device, there's a link in the description, and by doing so, you can receive up to $200 back in Samsung credit. You can see on screen here how this sort of breaks down depending on what you reserve. So again, if you want to reserve your Flip or your Fold, link in the description. Let's kind of keep talking about Samsung phones and cameras though, because this is interesting, and then it leads kind of into the Pixel 6a release and the discussions kind of going on around it as well. We see rumors coming from Sam Mobile that Samsung could be about to remove their depth sensor, their depth camera, from their mid-range phones. If you don't know, they've done this for a long time. There will be some little 5 megapixel depth sensing camera on their device, and it allows them to be able to say, hey, we got like 4 cameras on our device. Oh my God, 4 cameras, and it's only $300. It's only $450, and it's got 4 cameras. Well, the reality is there's a primary that's pretty good. There's an ultra wide that's so-so. There's a macro that's trash, and there's a depth sensing camera that is absolutely useless. And this kind of speaks to, I'm going to let you kind of see this article here, because the rumor is basically A24, A34, A54, we're going to be going down to 3 cameras. We're getting rid of the depth camera. I would argue you could probably get rid of that macro camera too, because it's garbage. It's like 5 megapixels. It's not good. It's not worth having on there. Save some money, lower the price, get rid of both of them, because we don't need them. They don't do anything worth having. I digress. This kind of leads back into, though, the discussion that was kind of there around the Nothing phone for a while. Nothing came out and they said, we're not going to have 4 cameras, we're going to have 2 good cameras. And from what I've seen from the reviews, they do in fact have 2 pretty good cameras. They're both, I believe they're both 50 megapixel sensors for the ultra wide and the standard, which is very different. They're still only $450, and the results of that camera, pretty darn good. I think people, from what I've seen, have been pretty pleased with the camera performance on the Nothing phone. So this is kind of 2 different ways, 2 different approaches, right, of producing a budget phone. Do you want to just squeeze stuff in there for the sake of squeezing it in there? Or do you want to be more deliberate and make, more consumer-focused decisions, not just to fill out a spec sheet necessarily, but to actually deliver a better product? In this instance, I think what Nothing has done is the correct approach. Well, how does this lead into the Pixel 6a discussion? Well, if you've been on Twitter, on Tech Twitter, in the last 24 hours, perhaps you've watched some video reviews of the Pixel 6a. There are a few things about the 6a that people seem to be very much up in arms about. By the way, if you would like to pre-order the Pixel 6a through Amazon or through the Google Store, I will drop links in the description as well, because you can get one pre-ordered and get a free set of earbuds along with it. So definitely check that out if you're interested. So what about the Pixel 6a has gotten people so upset? Well, if you Google the Pixel 6a reviews, you can see these headlines. They seem to be quite positive. People seem to really like the thing. I mean, this is all pretty positive stuff. A smart choice for $449. Pares down Pixel 6 to perfection. One of the best sub $500 phones you can buy. So why are people mad? Well, the term 60 hertz has been trending on Twitter, at least in my corner of Twitter, for the last little bit, which is hilarious to me, and I love this. I've really enjoyed sitting back and watching the arguments and the discussions about this. If you don't know, the Pixel 6a has a 60 hertz display. And of course, in many reviews, reviewers have mentioned this fact, as I believe it is their job to do. They are meant to review the phone. They're meant to tell you what its specifications are. And a lot of reviewers have cited the 60 hertz display as one of the weaker points of the Pixel 6a, which I think, personally, is fair. It has a 60 hertz display. That's not as good as a 90 hertz display or a 120 hertz display, okay? The Pixel 6 has a 90 hertz screen. The 120 hertz is in the Pixel 6 Pro. So we go 120, 90, 60. It does make some sense, right? But here's the reality. 60 is worse than those, so they're going to mention it. Now, some people have taken offense to this. They've said, yes, but this is a budget phone, so why are we mad that it only has a 60 hertz display? It is a $450 phone. I've seen people say the iPhone SE or most of the iPhones only have 60 hertz displays, and they're way more expensive than this thing. And I mean, yeah, I get that, but like, why are you comparing this to an iPhone? This is not an iPhone. I honestly don't think it makes sense at all. I don't think many people are trying to decide between the iPhone 13 and the Pixel 6a. I just don't think this is a comparison that makes any sense at all. I think you should compare the Pixel 6a to phones people would be comparing it to. Phones are going to be deciding between. So other $450 flagships. And this is where I think the people that are mad at others saying the 60 hertz display is a weak point of the device, I just don't think it makes any sense to be mad about this, because there are a ton of $450-ish phones you would be comparing if you're shopping for the 6a. You're shopping for, hey, I've got $500 to spend on a new phone. You're comparing phones. Almost all of the other phones you're going to look at have better than 60 hertz displays. The Samsung A53, which is regular price, the same price, and actually it's $100 off on Amazon right now. Guess what? It's got a 120 hertz display. The Nothing phone, which is right there in that same price point, has a 120 hertz display. I don't understand this. Like, I've seen people also say, yeah, and if they put a 90 hertz display in it, then people will complain about the battery life. And like, I guess that's kind of true, but I think people are ascribing to reviewers some sort of cynical scheme to hate this phone when I just don't think that's what's happening. I'm not even sure that I've seen an overly negative review. I've watched several, I've read a couple just to see what the general idea was. I wanted to see like all these complaints about, oh, they're killing it over the display. I can't find examples of this phone being killed for the display. What I can find is they're going through the good things and the bad things, and they're saying these things are good, these things are not so good. That's what a review is. And this idea I keep seeing floating around that you shouldn't expect a high refresh rate screen on your budget phone just does not hold water in the world we live in today, where so many of the budget phones have high refresh rate screens. There's this thing I do sometimes where I make a table to like compare the specs of devices, right? And like, this is kind of what you do when you're reviewing a budget phone. You're thinking about the budget phone you're reviewing, and then you're thinking about the other budget phones available to the buyer. You're trying to provide a value to the person buying the phone, right? So you would take the specs and you would compare them, and you would say, well, you're going to buy the Pixel 6a or the Nothing phone or the Galaxy A53, and you would sort of compare and contrast their specifications. And in some places, the Pixel 6a is going to come out on top, right? Camera performance, you're probably going to give it to the 6a. But then when you get to the display, and it's the only one that's a 60 hertz, you don't go, well, but I mean, we can't really knock it for that because it's a budget phone. Well, the other phones have it. The other phones have a better display. They have a faster refresh rate. So we can knock it because the other ones have it. If no budget phone had a 90 hertz display, then yeah, this would be an argument, but a lot of them do. In fact, a lot of them have it. They're even cheaper than this. So you're going to compare and contrast. You're going to mention places where the 6a is better, mention places where the 6a is worse, but for a certain contingent of people, you can't say where anything is worse, because if that's your brand, you won't have it. Personally, I don't think this is even really that big of a deal. Like the high refresh rate screen thing, it's nice to have, but it doesn't change your world. And in fact, I'm sure many of you know this, after, a day or two of using the phone, you don't even notice that it's high refresh rate anymore. When you go back to a low refresh rate, then you go, oh yeah, this is a little jankier. But then like a day later, you've forgotten again. It's not something that like stays with you. So this isn't even a big deal, yet it's literally trending on Twitter because we have to have something to argue about, and it's just strange to watch. We can't be so emotionally tied to these brands. We have to be willing to accept criticism of the things that we like. I'm a huge Surface Duo fan, and I took my SIM out of my Surface Duo and put it into a Z Fold because it was too buggy for me to use. And I told you guys about it. I brought this information to you, and when the Duo 2 came out, I took my SIM out of my Fold, put it back into a Duo, and I reviewed it, I feel like, quite honestly. And I don't feel like I've ever gone out of my way to minimize the faults with these devices. I've talked about the bad camera. I've talked about how the camera on Duo 2 is improving, but it's still probably only like a 6.5 or a 7 out of 10 camera. We have to be honest about these things. If someone comes to me and says, the camera on Duo is terrible, I'm going to say, well, it's not terrible. It's not great, but like, let's be honest, it's okay. I'm not going to say you can't criticize it. You can't, it overexposes stuff sometimes. Yep, it sure does. That's a true fact about this device's camera. I've made entire videos on multiple occasions chronicling all of the bugs you find people have reported about these devices. Don't shy away from criticism. It's okay. It takes me back to the days of my childhood when we would argue about which game console was the best. Very, very similar vibe to what's going on right now. And it's like I said, it's been quite interesting to watch. Guys, thanks for watching. Extra big thanks to the YouTube members whose names are scrolling across your screen. Now they have chosen to click that join button down below to help directly support the channel. Thanks a ton for that. And thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. And until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.